Thank you. Well, it's always good to be back here in San Jose. My wife was from San Jose. Remember Maria Rodriguez? And she went to Lincoln High. Graduated from San Jose State. Then I stole her away, so now she's at UCLA. But, yes, you know, I was an undergraduate at Berkeley in the 60s. Yeah, I was there, Third World Strike and all. And then we got involved in setting up clinics. I got involved in setting up La Clínica de la Raza. We worked with Gardner here, with Alviso and some of the others, and Maria's doing that. And then 22 years ago, UCLA made me an offer I couldn't refuse, so I left Berkeley, went to UCLA. We had kids, and as the kids got into high school, it became clear to me that I needed to talk with them. So I decided to write a book. It became La Nueva California. Actually, I wrote it for our kids. And in fact, it's dedicated to our kids. Here they are when they were little. That's Catalina and Diego. And here they are bigger. And so our daughter Catalina, in fact, she spent a year as a Polanco Fellow. She graduated from Berkeley. She was here as a Polanco Fellow, loved legislature. And now she's working for Assemblywoman Fiona Ma, but is going off to law school this fall. And our son Diego, is he a hunter or what? At one point, I was talking to our daughter. She was in high school. And Maria and I were the generation to say, we're bilingual. And she said, oh, well, I'm not bilingual. And we said, wait a minute, Mijita, you speak Spanish, don't you? Yes. And you speak English, don't you? Yes. Why aren't you bilingual? She said, well, you know, Dad, when you guys, that's all you guys, when you guys use the term bilingual, it kind of means there's a division between the two languages. And see, for me and my friends, there's not a division. I said, well, what? I don't understand that. I mean, there's either English or there's Spanish. How can there not be a division? So I said, well, what does it mean to you, Mijita, that you say you're bilingual? He said, well, what it means to me and my friends is when we listen to the radio, we have more choices. Yeah, there's no difference. So at any rate, I wanted to share with them our experiences, our generation, so that they would know what it was like to be a Latino in California during the last half of the 20th century. So they could take this experience and move it into the 21st century. So that's why I wrote this book, quite frankly. It's a dialogue that I want to have with the younger generation, between the older generation. So it's all of us, you know, it's older folks. I want to talk to we all want to talk to all of you, the younger folks, because there's something very good happening. Something tremendous happening. That's what I want to share about. Let me just give some background, how I came to write, why I even thought about writing this. Okay, I was born in California back in 1945, born in LA. My grandpa got there about 100 years ago. We've been there for a while. When I was born, the day I was born, there were 7 million people in the entire state of California. Imagine 7 million in the entire state. Now LA County alone has 10 million. 7 million people, but before I went to kindergarten, before I took my first step into kindergarten, the population of the state doubled. What happened? Well, World War II ended. A lot of GIs came home. And the way that my dad told me, and he was in the Navy during World War II, is that during World War II, a lot of folks were drafted, and they came in from Illinois and Chicago and Iowa and Minnesota, where you have 6 months of snow. No basic training here in California. No snow. And as a lot of them sailed off, this is primarily the Pacific Theater, and as California sank below the horizon, a lot of them swore, you know what, if I get out of this war alive, I don't want to spend another winter shoveling snow. I'm moving to California. And you know what, right after World War II, they did. And the population almost doubled from 7 million to 12 million in 5 years. Well, they not only moved here from Minnesota and Iowa and everything else, they had babies. This is the famous baby boom. 83 million baby boom. So, as this was all beginning, this was the composition of the population of California. It was basically about 90% non-Hispanic white. And you can speak of small minority populations, Latino, African American, Asian, Pacific Islander. You had a minority population at that point. Don't worry, these figures are all in the book. See, I can see it on the strap. No, the book is right there. It's probably figure 1 or something. Okay. Well, the baby boom went on, And we built out the state's infrastructure. We built the elementary schools, the junior highs, the high schools, the community colleges, the Cal States, the new UC campuses. And we thought we were going to do this forever. But one day in 1964, everybody that was going to move out to California pretty much had moved out. And all the families who are going to have kids pretty much had all their kids. And you can't do this forever. You do pass out of the age of fertility. And the baby boom was over. Now, it took a while for this to sink in. But what happened was the baby bust, beginning in 1965. And what we can see, and these are historic data, is that the birth rate, the fertility rate, fell for the non-Hispanic white population tremendously. It's falling continuously. But it took a few years for this to sink in. Now, what this would mean is that with no more folks moving in from the Midwest, and then them not having any more babies, that the non-Hispanic white population was not going to grow, and in fact could possibly shrink. Here is what happened in LA Unified School District. As we look at total enrollments, it had been going up since 1946, hit a peak of 650,000 in 1969, and then in 1970 for the first time, they had fewer students enrolling than they had the year before. Well, for the first couple of years, you think, oh, this is just, a little variation. The baby boom parents are catching their breath, and then they're going to produce more babies. But it kept going down and down and down and down and down. Went down to about 530,000. And those of you who remember, in the 1970s, one of the biggest issues in educational policy is what to do with surplus property. We had too much capacity. Remember, the big issue was, well, do we give it away? Do we rent it? Do we lease it? Do we develop it? But we don't need it. So we started closing schools. Assistant professor up at Berkeley had just gotten tenure. And I got a letter from the president of the University of California. Well, at first, I saw this letter addressed to me from the president, and wow, he's probably going to congratulate me for getting tenure. So I opened it up, and actually it was a form letter. But it was a rather alarming form letter from the president, because he was trying to prepare us that things were going to be hard up ahead. Because of those declining enrollments in LAUSD, there had been now for a number of years fewer students going to the high schools, which means there were going to be fewer students graduating, which meant there were going to be probably fewer students going to the University of California. So he was preparing us for the fact that we're going to see shrinking enrollments. Probably we're going to have to shrink a couple of campuses. He was going to try his best to keep the campuses open, but there was just going to be less. Well, I read that letter and I thought, is this right? So I started pulling out some data and just started to look at it. This is like 1977. 1978, I was asked to be a member of the System-Wide Health Sciences Committee. It's in charge of all the graduate professional health sciences education within the UC system: medicine, dentistry, nursing, pharmacy, veterinary medicine, optometry, public health. And they set policy for medical education. So I went to my very first meeting. I'm a young, wet behind the ears, just got tenure professor. What did I know? I went to the very first meeting, and they had taken David Saxon's, the president of the University of California, letter to heart. And they had already come to the consensus that yes, we were training too many doctors. We needed to close one medical school. And the consensus was you couldn't touch UCSF, and you couldn't touch UCLA. They're kind of grandfathered in. But we had just opened up 3 new medical schools: UC San Diego, UC Irvine, UC Davis. Which of those 3 would we close? That was the first item on the agenda of the first meeting I went to. So I raised my hand, and I said, I don't think that'll close anything. What do you mean? Baby bust, shrinkage, blah, 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 blah. I said, well, that's true only if you look at the non-Hispanic white population. But I was running a clinic for 4 years up in Oakland. We saw a lot of immigration. We saw a lot of fertility, and all the clinics are seeing this. And I'm getting all the data. I haven't read it all yet, but I'm getting all the data. There's going to be a huge population boom, only it's going to be in the Latino population. Well, they didn't close anything, luckily. And I went ahead, I got all my data, and I wrote a book. This book, The Burden of Support, Young Latinos in an Aging Society. Now, this book was kind of revolutionary because in it, remember how in 1940 Latinos were just this itty-bitty small minority population? In this book, I had the temerity to suggest that by 2030, Latinos would be almost half the population of the state of California. I remember the first time I presented it, people were saying, "You're crazy, how can this happen? You're a minority. How does a minority ever become a majority? It never happens." Well, I'm a methodologist. I take great pride in my methods. I had finally gotten some data, starting with the 1980 census, and I started tracking the data. And so here we look at the composition of births from 1975 to 2001. Now, 1975, which is about this time, Latinos are about 20% of the births. But by looking at differential fertility and migration patterns, it was clear to me, and I projected, that Latinos are going to be half the births by shortly after the turn of the 21st century. Now, these are not projections. These are actual historical data. This is what actually happened, but I was able to project it using demographic modeling. So what I foresaw is that because of fertility immigration, is going to have a Latino population explosion. You wouldn't have it in the non-Hispanic white because their in-migration and fertility boom had occurred right after World War II. And sure enough, by the way, you can still buy this book. It's published by Stanford University Press. You can read it, and I have hit every single census right on the money. I mean, I started writing this book 30 years ago. The numbers go. I'm a very good methodologist, I like to think. The Unified School District enrollments have gone up. Now to just a little bit over what they used to be, and almost all of that increase in enrollment has been in Latino student enrollment. But I can see that happen. Well, Stanford is very proud of this book. And I was projecting that by 2000, Latinos would be approximately a third of the state. And then by 2030, that Latinos would be almost 40%. Now, actually, this is a boring book to read. Well, it is, because it's a demographic book. I knew I was going to make a rather, at that time, audacious statement that Latinos are going to be half the state of California. So I really focused in on numbers. And most of the book is just boring page after page after page of numbers, formulae, graphs, charts, just talking about how many Latinos they're going to be. And we vary the scenarios under high fertility, low fertility, a lot of immigration, no immigration, this and that, the other. But they all point in the same direction. There are going to be a lot of Latinos in California by about 2030, 2040. So, Stanford University Press actually had a book signing up at the Commonwealth Club up in San Francisco. This is 1988 when the book came out. So I went up and I gave a presentation. Now, I'm a methodologist, but when you're doing research, particularly in biomedical sciences, you pay a lot of attention to methods, but you're always worried, did I commit the fatal flaw somewhere? Did I overlook something really basic all the way back to day one that just undercuts everything that I'm going to say? But I just overlooked it. So I was worried about the fatal flaw. Because I knew people were going to pick and prod and poke at these models. So the book was released, and I got the reaction. And I was unprepared for it. It was a huge negative reaction. But it wasn't about the methods. I was expecting, oh, you forgot this, or you forgot that, or how about this looking at the fertility rates? Nobody has said boo about the methods, and now 30 years later you can pull this book off the shelf. It's right there. The methods were good. That was not the cause of the reaction. The reaction was something on this wise. So, Hayes-Bautista, you're telling me that by 2030 California is going to be half Latino? Well, that's what the projections say. Oh my God! Why? It's the end of the world! Why? Half Latino! Why? Didn't you watch the news last night? No, I've been doing projections. I'm a nerd. Go home and watch the news. Oh, okay. I was doing projections, so I went home that night, and I turned on the news. Now, if you go home tonight and turn on the news in English, and if there's a story on Latinos, what is it going to be? Gangs, illegal immigrants, teenage pregnant moms on welfare. Okay, so I went and I watched, and yet that was the news. So I saw this guy the next day, and he said, well, did you see the news? Yeah, well, what did you see? Well, I saw gangs, illegal immigrants, teenage pregnant moms on welfare. See what I mean? And you're telling me that by 2030, half of California is going to be composed of illegal immigrants, teenage gang-banging pregnant moms on welfare. And I don't want that. Gee, I was just doing projections. So I went back home the next night, turned on the news, sure enough, same set of stories. I kept watching the news, getting the same set of stories. And I began to wonder, what's going on here? So I started to dig into this, And I discovered the theoretical and policy model undergirding all this, which is the urban underclass. Now, this was developed in the 60s to try to explain how it is that urban populations behave. It began with Daniel Patrick Moynihan's tangle of pathology model. As he looked at urban inner city areas, he saw high divorce rates, a high percent of unwed mothers, and a high percent of female-headed households spawn socially costly behaviors. By the way, he wrote this in 1967. Failure of youth to perform in school, juvenile delinquency, crime, unemployment, drug addiction, isolation, and alienation. That's the theoretical model. It was given perhaps its most succinct formulation by William Julius Wilson, who used to be at the University of Chicago. These are the characteristics that you can measure of the urban underclass. High rates of labor force desertion. Guys just not working, particularly male. In fact, they're out of work for so long that they forget to look for work. Okay. Because they're out of work, you have high rates of poverty. Because you have high rates of poverty, you have high rates of welfare dependency. And because the welfare rules, you only give it to incomplete families, that forces the breakup of families. And then you get major health problems. So I asked myself, well, but does this apply to Latinos? Well, other people were trying to answer that question for me and say, yes, you are an urban underclass. And in fact, in 1990, the Government Accounting Office said, in one of their reports on the urban underclass, in no uncertain terms, the urban underclass are concentrated in urban neighborhoods and they are predominantly black or Hispanic. So there, we work. So I was saying that half of California is going to be close to this population that drops out of the labor force and lives on welfare all the rest of its life. In healthcare, we have a model that also sprang out of that same sort of body of theory and policy called the minority health disparity model. Now, this is something that I was a little bit more familiar with, and I just taught this when I went to school over at UCSF. I took this definition right off the webpage of the Office of Research on Minority Health. Don't worry, this is all in the book. Everything you see here is in the book, except for the photographs. Okay. So this is how they define the minority health disparity. African American, American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian and Pacific Islander, and Hispanic citizens suffer poorer health and higher rates of premature death than the majority population. And you hear this all the time, you know, this minority group suffers more of this, or another minority group suffers more of that. Okay. In this health disparity model, this is actually based on a classic epidemiological model called the epidemiological risk factor model. If you're going to compare the health of two populations, and one population has higher risk factors, usually operationalized as lower income, lower education, less access to care, then that population is going to have a higher incidence of adverse health outcomes. You're going to have more mortality, shorter life expectancy, higher infant mortality, more drug use, more health-harming behaviors, these sorts of things. Classic model, absolutely classic. Well, I knew that Latinos, almost across the country, compared to other populations, have lower income, lower education, less access to care. So, were my critics correct? We're facing this potential almost demographic time bomb, just Latinos just oozing forth gazillions of babies who are going to grow up and live on welfare and be criminals all their life. Well, I did what any academic would do. I said, well, you know, let me get some data. So I went up here locally to the Hewlett Foundation, and I convinced them to let us do a statewide survey. This was 1988, 87, 88. So we can find out, really, what do Latinos do when they go home at night? Do they really just sit around and scheme how to get more welfare and how to rob cars? Or what? Because nobody knew. All people knew what they see on the news. And I thought, well, you know, so I looked at myself, I looked at my family, I looked at my wife, I looked at her family, I looked at our friends. None of us were teenage pregnant moms or gangbangers or illegal immigrants. I'm thinking, well, are we weird? Or are those views weird? So I wanted to find out. So I pulled together a team of researchers. We were going to go out early in 1990, right before the census. We were going to interview 1,800 Latino households across the state of California. We were developing a state-of-the-art sampling framework. We were developing a state-of-the-art questionnaire. And as we were getting close to the date that we were going to go out in the field, I started to get worried. What if and I'm a pretty damn good methodologist, use my best methods, and I get all the data, and I crunch the numbers, and it turns out that truly Latinos are nothing more than a bunch of teenage, pregnant, mom, gang-banging, illegal immigrants. Wow. Do I want to do this? I began to worry a little bit about what I was going to find, because I kept reading the newspaper and watching the news, and I kept hearing the same stories over and over and over and over again. Finally, one morning I was driving to campus, and the enormity of what I was about to do really hit me. I thought, oh my God, I've used all my training and all my skills. I proved Lou Dobbs right. I'll be known as the Judas Iscariot of Chicano studies in the 21st century. Everybody's going to hate me. It really bothered me. I got to my office, I got clinically depressed. I sat in my office, my limbs felt like lead. I just didn't want to move. I was hoping maybe the big one would hit, swallow us up, and I wouldn't have to do the survey. But it didn't hit. And I think maybe I could call Hewlett and give them the money back and say, I don't want to know. That's not going to look good. Finally, I could, I'm just not there to do suicide. I'm not that suicidal. But I thought, well, when I'm at the end of my rope, I'll do what I always do. Let me call the woman from San Jose. So I called my wife, Maria. And I said, I feel awful. I'm about to do something. I can't stop it. I'm afraid to do it now. Can I talk to you? And she said, sure. Come on down and talk. Well, she's one of these perky types. She was a cheerleader in Lincoln, right? She's a Bassett cheerleader. So she was working at the School of Nursing at that point. In fact, she was doing the first ever study of drug-exposed infants. It had just been required as a reportable incident on the birth certificate. And she was actually going to hospitals and Xeroxing birth certificates of all the births that had occurred the week before, taking back to UCLA and entering them on a card punch. This is how long ago this was. Okay. She said, come down and join me for lunch. And just talk to me about what's bothering you. Fine. I could unburden myself. So the clock ticks towards noon. Finally it was noon, so I walked down to her office at School of Nursing. And just as I'm about ready to open the door, it flies open. Maria comes running out. She had a big armload of punch cards. And she said, wait for me. I have to take these up to, remember this, the Academic Computing Center, because we only had one mainframe on campus. And away she went and left me. Right there. At the door. Even my wife doesn't want to talk to me about it. So I walked into her office, and I sat down in her chair. I realized I had about 15, 20 minutes to kill. So I started just poking around, and I saw her mail, started to read her mail. We're married, we do this. She reads mine, it's okay. And then, as I was poking around through her mail, I noticed something that she had got from LA County Health Department, and I pulled it up. And I looked at it, and I beheld the title, and as I opened it up, that book changed my life. This is the book that changed my life. Vital Statistics! Los Angeles County. Am I a nerd or what? But it did. It put me on a radically different path of research for what I'm doing today. For the first, I remember, those who are old enough, remember when Latinos didn't exist in any of the, because we were always either other minority or along with white, or where was a Latino. This is the first time, because remember that Nixon actually had mandated people had to start using the Hispanic category, and so gradually, grudgingly, people started using it. 1980 census, the first time it was used, took a long time to get health. This is the first time that one entity, this is LA County, actually presented data with Hispanics in a separate column. So for the first time, I could finally find out what really was going on with Latino health. I had 15 minutes to kill, so I opened it up, and I had my epidemiological epiphany. Try saying that 3 times in a row. Epidemiological epiphany. But literally, it's like Saul on the road to Damascus. Scales fell from my eyes, and I saw for the first time clearly what Latinos were all about. Here is what I saw. Now, here are the top 10 causes of death. Now, I've updated these data, by the way, to 2005. Okay. I saw the same patterns for 1986 data. Number 1 cause of death in California is heart disease, followed by cancer, followed by stroke. Nationally, the same thing. Number 1 cause of death is heart, followed by cancer, followed by stroke. So I opened the book to the number 1 cause of death, which is heart disease. Now, from everything I have been taught, If I'm going to compare Latino mortality rates, and we're going to age adjust, so we're comparing apples with apples, to non-Hispanic white Latinos should have way higher mortality rate for heart disease, right? Poorer, less education, don't even get me going with the Latino physician shortage, less access to care. So I opened it up, I ran my fingers down the column, and I saw the equivalent of this. Okay, the age-adjusted mortality rate for non-Hispanic white is 215.5 deaths per 100,000. That is, if you took, say, the Rose Bowl holds 100,000 people. If you filled it on New Year's morning with 100,000 non-Hispanic whites, and then you ask them to come back next New Year's Eve and have a big party, during that year, on an age-adjusted basis, 215.4 of them would have died of heart attacks. Now, if you fill the Rose Bowl with 100,000 Latinos and ask them to come back a year later, only 152 would have died of heart disease. 35% fewer. I remember looking and I said, hey, wait a minute. That doesn't compute. That doesn't look like everything I was taught at UCSF. Well, maybe something's weird. Okay, let me look at the number 2 cause of it. Since then, I've come to understand this is classic. In fact, as we look nationally, and across the entire country for 2004, the non-Hispanic white rate is 210.7. The Latino rate, and this is in California to Massachusetts, Florida to Washington, Texas to North Dakota, add in all Latinos, we see the same thing. Latinos have 35% fewer heart deaths. And it's very stable. Now I come to expect this. Here we have 5-year of data point, 1999, 2004. We see the same thing year after year after year after year, state after state. Now this is what I come to expect. Then I was seeing it for the very first time and thinking, this doesn't make sense. So I looked at the number 2 cause of death, which is cancer. Well, here the non-Hispanic white rate is 178.7. The Latino rate is 40% lower, 120.7. I remember thinking, ooh, and this really doesn't compute. But now we look at the national rate, we see the same thing nationally, and again year after year. The number 3 cause of death, stroke. Now here the Latino rate is only 20% lower than non-Hispanic white, but in all these we're expecting that should be much higher. Here's the national rate, very much the same picture. And finally began to dawn on me, what might happen as Latinos become half of the state of California? Now actually now the Centers for Disease Control has done some of that work for me a little bit later. As we look at the CDC Atlas of stroke mortality by county, they've mapped it out by county. The way you read this map is the lighter the shade, the lower the stroke death rate, the darker the shade, the higher the stroke death rate. Well, you notice those counties, like in Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, South Texas, Southeast Florida, Cook County, New York, have a lot of Latinos, really low stroke death rates. And the places that don't have a lot of Latinos, like the Northwest, Mississippi Valley, Atlantic Seaboard, have high stroke rates. You see the same thing with heart. In fact, the region from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico in epidemiological circles is called Heart Attack Alley. The folks live there, non-Hispanic whites, just like live in California and New York, but in that area, the way people live, if you will, culture leads to extremely high rates of heart. But if Latinos are around, the rates are a lot lower. Now, it's not that Latinos transmit some immunity to the non-Hispanic whites. We haven't figured that out. We're working on that. But as you get a lot of Latinos in a population, in the aggregate, the population gets healthier. Wow, I never thought that Latinos could do something good. I've never heard of that. Nobody's ever told me that part. So here's our cardiovascular death rates. Okay, so let's look at all causes of death, remembering that within all of this there are some exceptions, and diabetes is one of them. Okay, but that's a whole other presentation. And in all causes of death, the Latino rate is about 30% lower in the state of California, ditto nationally. Well, here I was looking at this, and again we see the time sequence. This is very, very stable. It doesn't vary from year to year. So I quickly turned over to the infant mortality. See, what can we see there? Now, in terms of infant mortality, here we have 34 years of data from 1970 to 2004. This is non-Hispanic white infant mortality. And usually infant mortality is very closely linked to a mom's education and how much prenatal care she got. Well, when we compare Latinas to these non-Hispanic white, moms. We know that the Latino moms have far less education, receive far less prenatal care, and they initiate far later into the pregnancy. So what is the non-Hispanic, or what is the Latino infant mortality rate? Virtually identical for 34 years. How do they do it? How have Latinos managed to reduce the risk for heart disease by 35%, reduce the risk for cancer by 40%, reduce the risk for stroke by 20%, have good infant mortality identical to non-Hispanic white? As we look at low birth weight, it's virtually identical, like infant mortality. And I was looking at this and really puzzling because it didn't make sense. This didn't look like the Latino population I saw right out on the 11 o'clock news. Have you ever heard the 11 o'clock news say, cure heart disease discovered, eat more frijoles? Well, I don't know that it's frijoles, so maybe it's tortillas. But you know, it has to be something because it's happening in 45 million people. You can't just say, oh, poo-poo. This now has a term. It's called the epidemiological paradox. The Latino epidemiological paradox. Because you see, none of our models can explain it. So we think, no, but you guys are poor and you have rotten access to care. You should be dying like flies in the streets. But you know what? It's almost Latinos. We're going to do it our way. And we're not dying like flies in the streets. Far healthier than people really thought they would find Latinos. And interestingly, managed to do this while using services less. Let's look at service utilization. Because in our medical model, the more medical services you use, the healthier they are. The fewer you use, the less healthier. Well, we've seen, okay, Latinos 35% lower heart disease mortality. Latinos, on average, whether children, adolescents, or adults, make one fewer doctor visit per year, generate half the number of hospital bed days. I mean, we're very, very good. I mean, when I hear this stuff about, oh, these sickly, illegal immigrants coming in, flooding the ER, hello, please look at the data. That doesn't happen. Yes, they might happen to speak Spanish. Doesn't mean they're illegal. We've been speaking Spanish in this state for 240 years. That's a whole other presentation. Now, I'm going to add a little bit. Why are Latino babies so healthy? And I didn't know the answer back then, but I was thinking, God, Latino moms must be doing something very right. I didn't have the answer, but I'm going to share the answer with you. Is Latino moms know to do certain things. For example, when pregnant, Latino moms are far less likely non-Hispanic white to smoke. Well, if you're pregnant and you can't see a doctor, one of the best things you can do for a good birth outcome, don't smoke. Latino moms, far less likely to have a sexually transmitted disease. Latino moms, far less likely to give birth to a drug-exposed infant. These are very good behaviors. Now, where did they learn these behaviors? Did they go to the doctor and the doctor said, don't smoke, don't get a sexually transmitted disease, don't use drugs? No. Abuelita, this is culture. This is culture. And I begin to understand for the first time that Latino culture may just play an extremely positive role. Well, here's the upshot. One of the key indicators of the health of an area is life expectancy at birth. So a couple of years ago, the World Health Organization ginned up its computers. They computed life expectancy. And once again, when you compare all the countries, the country way at the top was Japan. They have the longest life expectancy. And the US is we're about number 30, I think, of life expectancy. Well, I got that report, so I ginned up our numbers. And I discovered a group, and let's talk about women, because women have longer life expectancies than men. I discovered a group of women that have a longer life expectancy than Japanese. I discovered a group with the longest life expectancy in the world. Latinas in California. So here I was staring this epidemiological paradox in the face, trying to make sense out of it. Fewer heart attacks, fewer cancers, fewer strokes, identical infant mortality, use services less, and it's biocultural. Something in the culture that Latinos do every day without even thinking is reducing the risk for heart disease by 35%. What is it? Well, at that point, my wife came back. Academic speaking said, oh, here I am, I'm a nerd, I'm often, nerdy-landia here. I just thinking, my head was just buzzing. I thought, wow, maybe I'll find something good in this survey. And just as she came back and said, okay, honey, I'm ready for lunch, I said, oh, I thought of another data set I need to look at. I'll take you to lunch later, honey, bye. And I ran out of the office. I'm still over that lunch. But I realized I got another data set I should have been looking at, to look at the Latino behavioral paradox. It wasn't just in healthcare. I was going to look at some census data that had been post-coded. Well, it turns out Latino, particularly males, have the highest labor force participation of any group. Here we have 60 years of data, starting in 1940, going to 2000. Latinos have consistently had a higher labor force participation rate than non-Hispanic white. Consistently, every single period. Well, you talk to employers who employ Latinos, hello, that's why they love immigrants. They work hard. And at the national level, same thing. Nationally, Latinos, males have a far higher participation rate than non-Latinos. And interestingly, immigrants participate even more than Chicanos. This is the immigrant rate, and this is the U.S. born Latino rate. I mean, the U.S. born Latino rate is quite respectable. Immigrants, way up there in the stratosphere. Latinos work more hours per week. Here we have national data. Latinos working 35 or more hours per week. Immigrant Latinos work even more hours per week. Latinos work more in the private sector. I remember that there was discussion when Obama first presented his budget. The guy who runs the Republican National Committee, was named Steele, was like, oh, but the government doesn't create jobs. Only the private sector creates jobs. Well, okay, if that's the case, then Latinos are certainly doing our part to pull this country out of recession. Latinos are far more likely to work in the private sector compared to non-Latinos. And immigrant Latinos virtually almost all work in the private sector. Conversely, Latinos rarely work in the public sector. Far less likely than non-Latinos, and immigrants basically don't work in the public sector. That's why you almost never find a Spanish-speaking person at DMV or at the library or wherever. It's just immigrants just don't work there. In spite of what you hear, Latinos have one of the lowest rates of welfare use. As we look at use of TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, Latinos have a lower rate compared to non-Hispanic white. And this is not what you hear on the news. And immigrants use it even less. So if we disaggregate that Latino figure to the U.S. born here, and immigrants, actually U.S. born do use it the same rate as non-Hispanic white. Immigrants actually don't use it. And yet I keep hearing that, oh, they're coming over here to go on welfare. Show me the data. And here we have national level data. And of course, strong families, and that's almost a cliche. But hey, the family is the key. That's the cornerstone of a society. If the family goes, a society goes. Well, for 60 years, Latino households have been far more likely to be composed of your classic couple with kids compared to non-Hispanic white. Ditto at the national level. So, as I saw these data, I thought, you know what? Maybe we're going to find something good in the survey. Then I started to feel energetic and good about it. And I wanted to make sure our methods were good, because I want to capture what were Latinos doing. So we went out and we did our survey. We published our books. No Longer a Minority is one of them. And we pointed out, guess what? Look at these very strong behaviors. And then I was waiting for the 1990 census, because you know, what if the census had a different picture? And I thought, boy, if we're in conflict with the census, we got us a major problem. No, they dovetail, and I get the data every single year with the current population survey, the American Community Survey, the 2000 census, January to 2010. We see the same profile, which now allows me to answer this question. I wish I could go back and find that guy who was yelling at me at the Commonwealth Club back in 1988. Remember his fear that California would be 50% composed of illegal immigrant, gang-banging, teenage pregnant moms on welfare? What will California be like when Latinos are half the population? Well, it's very simple. To begin with, as a whole, the population, because of half of it being Latino, will work harder than it has ever worked before. Higher rates of labor force participation, work more hours per week, work more in the private sector, generate the wealth that we can then redistribute around. Use welfare less. You know, in spite of that, you still get these cartoons of illegal immigrants going across the border, getting free education, jobs, free health care. It doesn't work like that. That's what they keep saying. Look at the data. It's not in the data. We use welfare less. Families will be stronger. There'll be fewer heart attacks, fewer cancers, fewer strokes, healthier babies. People will live longer. People are going to smoke less, use drugs less. And we have better parties. So I'd like to go back to that gentleman, share these data with him, all of which are in La Nueva, California. Each one of I've even updated these charts. I think the La Nueva, California, the health data were 2000, 2001. I keep updating my stuff. But the trends are the same. They don't change. Very, very stable trends. But I'd just like to ask him, okay, so California is going to be 50% Latino by 2040. So what's the problem? You want a population that works hard, strong family, very patriotic, strong communities, use welfare less, more than willing to do it, share. What's the problem? That's why I call it La Nueva, California. Thank you very much.
I am here at the NHU, the Distinguished Speaker Series, and what a fantastic event today. It's getting better and better, and so much information for Latinos. It's unlimited. The non-Hispanic people should be a little bit jealous.
I thought of so many people as I was sitting here listening to this incredibly important data. I thought I have so many people that should be here with us because it's really critical, it was very valuable, and it reinforces what a lot of us already know, that Latinos we have so much potential. We are achieving in so many different ways, but we don't hear it. So I really love and appreciate what you guys are doing, which is reinforcing the positive messages about Latinos in our community.
And I was very excited, from woman to woman, all the fantastic stats about Latino women. They say it's a phenomenon. Why? I mean, it really makes sense of the family.
It does. I mean, so I'm with the Hispanic Foundation of Silicon Valley. One of the things that we do every year at our annual gala, the Hispanic Charity Ball, is recognize a Latino family for their giving and their service in the community. And what we find is that the elders, the mothers, really pass on a tradition of giving, a tradition of service in the community, obviously working in the churches, all those things, those kind of charitable values are passed on by our parents. And the mothers are really central to that.
So there are unlimited challenges that people, not Latinos, but people in general, but since we are here and it is a shine, a spotlight on the Latino community, what do you think are the biggest challenges that your foundation runs into, like the Lions Club? They focus on eyesight, and what is your area your foundation focuses on? Would it be education and school?
It's a broad range of things. So we do grant making. We give grants to nonprofits that are doing great work in the Latino community. So we have focused and given grants for health and human services, on housing, on economic empowerment, on educational issues. The last couple of years we've really focused on childhood obesity in the Latino community because we know that diabetes is a big problem in the Latino community and it's getting younger and younger. This year we're also adding a focus on healthy aging because we have to take care of our Latino elders and they have specific needs that because so many our elders are cared for in our homes. We need to be aware of what are their needs and how can we best take care of our elders as they age.
Well, that's fantastic. We need to clone you and make a lot more of you. It was a great interview. Thank you. We will definitely be seeing more of Teresa Dorado on California Scenes, Best of the Bay Area. Where are you located? What is your website for more info?
We're located in San Jose, but we give grants. We give scholarships to Latinas, and we give grants to nonprofits in the Silicon Valley region, so Santa Clara County and part of San Mateo County. And our website is H as in Hispanic, F as in Foundation, Silicon Valley, SVHFSV.org.
And you don't need a diploma to find that one. Those are just letters, and all of us at home get there.
My name is Alberto Carrillo. I work at the Office of Human Relations where I've been for the last 25 years. And yesterday we had a very successful breakfast. We had over 600 people at the Whitney Hotel. This is our annual award, Human Relations annual awards. And I was very happy to have 600 people because our small little office, we can get that many people out for breakfast. We had a lot of politicians, a lot of appointed officials and groups and unions, and oh my God, I was so happy. And you need to know that I made over 200 calls to get people there. Getting back to where we are right now, the book that Dr. David Hayes-Bautista wrote, La Nueva California, there's some data, some important information that our community must know. La comunidad de habla hispana y especialmente los gringos y especialmente the media that keeps using negative information about Latinos. And now I am armed. This is like having a weapon in my side, because if you know how to read, if you know information, if you know how to use information, this is a very powerful tool. We must disseminate this information. It's very powerful. I recommend it to anybody that hears and sees this video, because you are going to be fascinated with the information that's here, and we need to enlist your help in spreading the word about what's in this book. Thank you very much.